Thank you for coming to our presentation by Rabbi Dennis Ross. He is the Director of Concerned Clergy for Choice and at Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts. And he is also author of All Politics is Religious. He's been an advocate at the state capitol for a long time and has been involved in issues around women's reproductive rights for even longer. And we're really happy to have him here today to talk to us about what is going on right now in reproductive health care. There is a lot going on, and it's kind of under the radar because we've been dealing with some bigger issues, and there's a lot of sneaky stuff that's going on right now. And so we want to make sure that we're aware of those things and can respond appropriately. So Rabbi Dennis, I'm going to turn the show over to you and spotlight you just a second. There you are. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Reverend Trumbore, thank you for the invite. It's great to be with all of you today. And I want to say Sam has, Sam stands out as a religious leader in our community, in our state really, because he walks the walk, he walks the talk. Basically, we're talking today about being socially involved, and I've lost count of the number of times that Sam as a friend has joined us at Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts, Interfaith Impact of New York State, has been to the Capitol on behalf of a vision that we share and hold in common very dearly. We were talking just before we began about yesterday night in Albany and the difficulties and violence and what sparked it, and we'll touch on that a little bit today in terms of healthcare disparities that existed even before this, the coronavirus struck. But I also want to lift up that life wasn't easy for a lot of folks before the pandemic hit, and it's only getting harder. And we hold them in our hearts and prayers as we work to make the world better and heal both spiritually and physically and really materially as well. And that life moves forward despite the challenges that we're confronting now. I'd like to share my screen. And let's go to a slideshow. Great. So the topic, contraception, abortion, religious liberty, and the upcoming election. Basically, we're dealing with sex, politics, and religion. There are three things that you shouldn't discuss in polite company. And yet we're going to raise all three, which could really stir the pot, but we'll do so in a positive way and common sense way as we move forward. Now, I direct Concerned Clergy for Choice for Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts. Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts is the umbrella for Planned Parenthoods across New York State. Upper Hudson Planned Parenthood, we work hand in hand, day in and day out with them. Planned Parenthood Greater New York and other Planned Parenthoods around the state. And as Reverend Trumbore has joined us time and time again, we work for laws and policies that advance access to reproductive health care for all communities in New York. Concerned Clergy for Choice, Reverend Trumbore is on our Clergy Advisory Board. Has more than 500 religious leaders across the state who've signed on to our commitment to ensuring access to contraception, keeping abortion safe and legal, And particularly as we talk to the Unitarian Universalist communities, where you have so much great experience here, access to comprehensive sex education for our teens. Basically, what we're going to say, which is why I say Reverend Trumbore walks the walk and walks the talk, is because Washington, I grew up in New York City, and I always thought that if anything important happens, it's going to happen in Washington, D.C., or happen in Manhattan. And Albany, well, nothing really goes on there. When the reality is, especially today, we see where Washington takes things away or doesn't give us, we can, time and time again, get that in Albany. And where Washington gives us so-called religious liberty initiatives that impair access to contraception and abortion, GLBT rights, where we've had international and now domestic gag rules that deny funding to any agency that performs or refers or discusses abortion. And we have abstinence-only sex education, which, as you know, in your congregations, in your denomination, OWL provides teens with the information they need, talks to them about creating healthy relationships, helps them learn the meaning of consent, even little kids, good touch, bad touch, what to do. Really, the problem with abstinence only isn't the word abstinence, though. It's the word only, that we got to give our teens all the information they need to keep themselves safe and healthy, and to us as spiritual communities, make informed decisions. Informed decision-making is so important in your faith and ours. Now, where Washington takes away or gets in the way, Albany has given us funding for family planning and reproductive health care services. And thank God the state has worked to restore funds that were cut when here in New York State we don't comply with the gag rule in our health centers, and we can now continue to provide the care we have been providing all along. We have the Reproductive Health Act, which Reverend Trumbore and some of you have advocated for. It took us 12 years to get that bill, which brings Roe versus Wade as the law of New York State. It protects a woman throughout her pregnancy. And in the rare and tragic circumstance where something goes wrong later on in a pregnancy, a pregnant person can get the health care they need here in New York State. We also have, just this last legislative session, the Comprehensive Contraception Coverage Act. This bill, the really needed legislation, it ensures a woman can get all forms of contraception that she might need. Some work better for some people than others. In the past, some insurance plans didn't cover some formularies, and thanks to the Comprehensive Contraception Coverage Act, each person can get the contraception they need. When someone's on birth control pills, ordinarily you can get up to a 3-month supply from your pharmacist, but thanks to the CCCA, we can now receive up to a year of birth control pills, especially for the way upstate areas where being able to get to a drugstore isn't the easiest thing to do. For being able to secure a full year's worth of pills has been really demonstrated to make a significant reduction in unintended pregnancy. So it's a great asset. Also, it establishes contraceptive equity, that any contraceptions that exist now or will exist for men will be covered, just like contraception for women in New York State as preventive medicine. Maternal Mortality Review Board has been established. This is essential because in New York State, 1 out of 4 women in Black communities have suffer from some kind of post-pregnancy, or I'm sorry, the rate of maternal mortality for women in the Black community is 4 times what it is in the white community. And this is an example of healthcare disparity. We're seeing with COVID, coronavirus, similar disparities where underserved and underrepresented communities aren't getting the healthcare that they should be getting. So New York State has established a maternal mortality review board to examine the causes for this discrepancy in maternal mortality in some underserved communities, and as a first step toward addressing them. As another example of what you can't get in Washington, well, we can get in Albany. Another thing that was recently banned was unconsented pelvic exams. Yes, during surgery in New York State, it was allowable, without a woman's consent, for medical students to perform an unconsented pelvic exam while a woman is under surgery. This was banned, can't be done without her consent. Believe it or not, that was the case until just recently. We also passed the Gender Non-Expression Non-Discrimination Act, which I know Interfaith Impact worked with us on, which bans discrimination based on gender. And also the BOSS bill, which protects people from being discriminated at work because of the health care, especially contraception that they might use. Also a ban on the gay trans panic defense. What this does is it prohibits the use of the temporary insanity argument as a defense in murder crimes, which has happened in some cases when there has been a murder under gender bias. And you just can't blame the victim for being murdered. I mean, it's not right. And this bill bans that as a panic as a temporary insanity defense. And then the Child Victims Act, which gives a victim of sex abuse more time to report their abuse. So let me one more slide, and then we'll have a chance to talk if you want. And then if you have any questions for it. We're working closely with Interfaith Impact of New York State and other groups to provide comprehensive sexuality education, medically accurate, age-appropriate information for kids in our public schools. That's critical because New York State has no standard requirement for sex education of any substance. So this would be critical. We're working on documenting the true impact of these so-called crisis pregnancy centers, which look like they provide medical care, but really don't. And then 2 measures to protect immigrant health, again, for underserved communities. Yeah, look, Planned Parenthood knows that sexually transmitted infections, don't ask whether you have a green card or not. The same thing for coronavirus. And so we need to protect individuals, thereby protect the public health. And when one person is protected from any community with these concerns, we're protecting the entire community. So I'd like to pause to see if there are any questions or comments.
Let me do an unmute all here.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Let people join in. I think, actually, I did have one question I wanted to put forward, which was, I know I've been reading about abortion restrictions happening in the country that have been related to the coronavirus. I'm wondering if you could comment on what's going on out there, because I haven't been following it closely. I thought maybe it'd be good to get an update.
Sure. Well, look, there are two ways to attack Roe versus Wade, as you probably heard. One is straight a frontal attack. We're gonna overturn it, and in that case, the laws regulating abortion would revert to the states. And another strategy is to chip away at it with medically unnecessary or concocted arguments. And this declaring abortion not essential for healthcare. It's like elective surgery. My brother's an orthopedist, and he wasn't doing hip replacements for a while. He was out of state, but because it wasn't deemed essential medicine, And what some politicians are saying is that, well, abortion isn't essential health care, but it really is, because it's time sensitive. It's essential for the person who, with their doctor, decides that the pregnancy isn't right for them. So it really is essential health care. In New York State, we got a great Attorney General, Letitia James, who came out and said abortion is essential for those who decide. It's essential for them, and it should be made available across the state right now. So that's, again, another, the opposition's very crafty in figuring out ways that sound good to some people to come after access to your reproductive health care. And we're fortunate, look, New York State isn't a perfect state, but we're fortunate to be in New York State, where many of the things that afflict people, make life even worse elsewhere, are we're in a better situation here. Is Jackie, do you want to ask something? You want to chat, text me or text us? Okay.
She can unmute if she wants to.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Doesn't know how to do it.
Oh, okay. I can do that for you here. Yep, there you are. Sorry.
Oh, she's back on.
Oh.
Yeah, this stuff is great when it works.
Okay, yeah,
Jackie, you're good.
But it works.
Dennis, I'm sorry, I'm sure you don't remember me, but
I remember you. Domestic violence was your
sexual violence. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's okay. And a longtime friend of Carol Blauer's.
Yeah.
I wanted to initially thank you for mentioning male contraceptive, because an awful lot of people, including members of the faith community, tend to concentrate on contraception for women, and they think about reproductive justice as a very narrow focus as opposed to a health issue for all people across the lifespan. So I'm glad to hear you mention male contraceptives, and I have not seen any legislation in the last year or so that really addresses male fertility and male rights. And I'm just curious if you could just let us know anything that is on the horizon in that respect.
I haven't seen anything either, so
Yeah.
That makes two of us. Yeah. Right now, our main issue is sex education. We work in coalition with other groups, as we did with you when it came to emergency contraception. And I haven't heard anything lately.
Okay. And then the second area, well, several areas. Yesterday, I had the great honor of facilitating a discussion on the movie The Rape of Racy Taylor, which is actually a very famous incident from 1944, where a young Black woman was actually accosted, kidnapped, and raped by 6 or 7 teenagers. And the idea of what was and was not known at the time in all of these respects was a feature of the case. And of course, rape being a major issue. So the thought of sexuality education came up, and a number of the people, majority of which were women, online discussing the call, not only had they not heard about the incident, but when I talked about having good sex language in the home and in the schools, and I would say most of these women, I would say, were in their 30s, maybe some as old as early 40s. And the idea of teaching your children age-appropriate but medically accurate language for the reproductive parts of the body, of their own body, and of perpetrators' bodies, and how important in terms of sexual violence it is, and the fact that a great deal of crimes go unreported and untreated because of the language, which gets us back to sexuality. and the fact that schools are still being so reticent and reluctant to address this with children, even below 7th grade, it's appalling. So, I'm glad the battle is ongoing, and I'm so sorry that in this day and age, we're still talking about what's appropriate, what isn't, and in terms of sexual violence, it is a factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, I'm so grateful for the work that Interfaith Impact does, the work that your Unitarian Universalist congregations do. A lot of folks think their kids get sex education in the public schools when their kids don't.
Right.
And just mentioning that seems to be one of the most important things to let folks know. Sometimes, but look, the home is the ideal educator, but there are times when the home isn't prepared or able to do it, and that's why we need the schools, because again, it's a public health concern, and as we see today, it's important to protect the public health across all kinds of lines that divide, be they race or gender or we got and immigration status. We've got to protect the public health and the public well-being. Anything else before we move ahead? Thank you, Jackie. Okay, so next. Okay, so this is where you've seen where we've what we've achieved in New York, what we're trying to work on now, and now there are a couple of current and emerging challenges that basically that we touched on. Impediments, bans and impediments to contraception and abortion access. It's important to remember contraception. That's why I always talk about the Comprehensive Contraception Coverage Act. I was in Texas several years ago when at that point the number of women's health centers had dropped from 42 to 24 across the state. And I learned about one woman who had one of these longer acting contraceptive implants. They can be good for 3 to 10 years. And she decided she wanted to have kids. But the implant needed to be removed by a doctor. We can't do that. You can't do that at home. But her health center closed, and she had to travel hundreds of miles to become pregnant, to become a mother. You can't even become pregnant there's so many barriers to becoming pregnant under some of the current rules and regulations. So it's important to keep contraception in mind because that's and critical. And the other thing is, we talk about Roe versus Wade being secure and sustained, but if you can make your own decision, that's great. But it doesn't mean much if you don't have access to the care that your decision would lead to, which is of import to communities across the spectrum here in the United States. So, among the other, so one of the big issues is so-called religious liberty, and we have an eye on November because we think these things are going to be coming up again as we head into the election, because we hear so much about religious liberty. Now, you might be familiar with this case, Newman versus Piggy Park Enterprises. Anybody recognize it? Anybody? Yeah, Jackie. Yeah, it's a great. Well, it was a great victory. There was a fellow named Maurice Bessinger who owned a restaurant, a great barbecue restaurant, I'm told, called Piggy Park in South Carolina. And after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 got passed, he refused to serve black people. He said that his faith teaches it's a sin to mix the races, and he wouldn't do it. If you're a person of color, you can come in and order your brisket and sides, just like I can, but you got to eat it over that tree under there or take it home, because you can't mix the races in his restaurant. So this case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court in 1968 as a challenge to the Civil Rights Act, and the court ruled, I believe the majority was 8-2, that you can't deny a public accommodation on the basis of your religion. That is, you can't use your religion as an excuse to discriminate against other people. That if you open a restaurant up and you serve one person, you got to serve the next one regardless of who they are and what they do. So here, this was, your religious liberty goes so far. You can do whoever have in your house, whoever you want. You can keep out of your house whoever you want. But when you open a public business and you hire the public and serve the public, you gotta not discriminate. That was it. Well, that was in '68. But then in 1976, we had what you may have called the Hyde Amendment, which on the basis of religion, basically, religious opposition to abortion, because the way I look at it, all opposition to reproductive health care has a faith motivation. They cover it up, or they try to hide it or not talk about it. But the Hyde Amendment prohibited federal funding for abortion unless there's a threat to the woman's health, the woman's health, life, or is a rape or incest. Now, there was no health exception in this bill, which really is a tragedy, because what it basically says, you need a health exception because it basically puts a doctor in a situation where I can't give you the care you need because you're not sick enough. In other words, your kidneys may be threatened or your blood pressure may be running high. I can't give you help. You're not sick enough, and I got to let you get closer to death before I can provide care for you. So the health provision is critical. But here it was where somebody's religion, the way I look at it as a religious person, somebody's religion was an excuse to take health care away from somebody else. Now, the Hyde Amendment is still in place. It gets voted in and re-voted in every year. New York State is one of among 15 states where Medicaid funding is made available through the state, so a person can have an abortion through Medicaid despite the Hyde Amendment. But the Hyde Amendment, again, is Piggy Park got reversed, and religion is now used as a tool to discriminate. Another tool that got distorted was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which protects religious minorities, say at the workplace. So if you want to wear a turban at work because of your religion, you want to wear a kippah, a head covering, because of your religion, you're allowed to do that. And as we go into these later decisions, this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the RFRA, was distorted to allow a religious majority to impose their restrictions into the private lives of others, or allow people of religion. They may not be the majority anymore. They're worried they're not going to be the majority anymore. But now, if your religion says, "Oh, you can discriminate," there's something wrong with two people of the same gender getting married, you don't have to respect them. That's basically where this bill is coming from. So we saw this play out in the Affordable Care Act and the Stupak ban. When the Affordable Care Act was ratified in 2010, also known as Obamacare, that your health care doesn't provide abortion coverage if you're buying it through the federal marketplace. You've got to go get a separate insurance policy for abortion coverage, because they don't want, they're opposed to abortion, and generally for religious reasons, and they have a religious objection to seeing the $1 a year, which is basically what an abortion rider covers for your insurance, the $1 a year go into your health care if it provides an abortion. There's a deeply held religious belief for that $1. That's what's going on. And then we saw the same thing where religion is used to discriminate against people like in your faith or my faith. By the way, the year 1929, Sam probably has heard me say this more times than he can count. It was a big year for Unitarian Universalists as well as Reformed Jews like me, because in 1929, both the Central Conference of American Rabbis and the Universalists, later merged with the Unitarians in 1929, were the first two denominations to endorse the moral good in access to contraception. So hooray for us, because we were leaders. We had courage back then. We were religious minorities back then, and we came forward. And then a whole host of mainline Protestant denominations, Baptist, Methodist, Episcopal, others, stepped up and said, yeah, access to birth control is morally good. So what you have is some religions, when you get to the Hobby Lobby decision, which allowed for a family-owned business or a privately owned business to deny contraception coverage from their employer-sponsored insurance. In other words, you work for this insurance, you pay for it through your own earned dollars, but you can't have the contraception that your religion says is a moral good you're allowed to have. You can't have it because your boss's religion sees something wrong in what your religion might say is right. So that's what came out of the Hobby Lobby decision. And then the Masterpiece Cake Shop decision a few years later, where the owner of a cake shop refused to provide a cake for two guys getting married to each other. Again, you're allowed suddenly, where Piggy Park said you cannot use your religion to deny a public accommodation to somebody. These last two court decisions said the opposite. Oh yes, if you have a deeply held religious belief, you can point to that belief to deny health care or basic civil rights to somebody else. And so basically it's a religious liberty. So I say it's so-called religious liberty because it's really religious discrimination. You're using your religion to discriminate against somebody else. So the takeaways on this is your deeply held religious beliefs are as legitimate as anyone else's. Your religion says yes, and someone else's religion says no. Politicians shouldn't privilege their restrictions, the restrictions of one faith, over the religious liberty of others. Your religious liberty should allow you to do in your private life what it is you want to do. Eat where you want, marry who you want, have kids when you want. If your faith determines that you're the final decider, makes sense to me. No? Any questions or comments before we go on to the next topic?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Just so I understand the law, the Supreme Court decisions, I believe the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the distinction would be legally that homosexuality is not a protected class under federal law. Am I right about that?
That's the way I'm seeing it.
Excuse me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I understand your the point about religious liberty, but they were legally distinguishable in that case, in that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm a religious person. To me, like my book says, all politics, it's religious. But there are many ways to approach the wrongness of these court decisions. Anything else? Okay, so we're going to be hearing about religious liberty as the next election comes up. And look, your deeply held religious beliefs are as important as anybody else's. That's important for us. Now, the other thing, abortion later in pregnancy. Way back to the State of the Union address, President Trump mischaracterized abortion later in pregnancy. The reality is there are very few abortions later on. 2/3 of abortions occur within the first 8 weeks of pregnancy, 88% within the first 12 weeks, and less than 2% 21 weeks and later. And when they happen, what's in that 2%? You don't get somebody walking in saying, "Oh, I want an abortion in 8.5 months just because I want one." I don't know anyone who behaves that way. What you have is a wanted pregnancy takes a very bad turn in a sad and tragic circumstance. You've got the name picked out maybe, or the baby's room painted, and something goes wrong in the pregnancy. What the Reproductive Health Act allows is for an abortion after 24 weeks, when either there's no fetal viability or there's a threat to the woman's health or well-being. That's what it allows. Now, in the past, before the Reproductive Health Act, people actually, maybe you lobbied with us and you met Erin and Garrett. She was pregnant, and they had to leave New York State for her to get the health care she needed later on in the pregnancy because something tragically happened. And when you got to leave the state, not only do you have to pay to go to Colorado where they went, but you're out of your network. So this could be easily a 5-figure expense and out of the reach of many because of someone else's religious beliefs. So the Reproductive Health Act really is there to underscore that if you get serious complications to develop throughout a pregnancy, a woman needs protection throughout her pregnancy. This is a devastating circumstance where a woman's life or health can be in danger. Many faiths teach that her well-being is a priority. A potential person, the fetus, has a moral standing, but the woman's moral standing as an actual person is higher. And sometimes, though, this can be a health or life endangerment, or you learn a pregnancy won't survive. And basically, the doctors and patients need to have their options when something goes terribly wrong. And they need to be able to get the health care that they believe is right, which is why we're fortunate here in New York State that we have this bill. No one's walking in and saying, kill my baby. I mean, this is how it's being mischaracterized. I hate to say it. But and we heard it at the State of the Union address, and we hear it time and time again. So the takeaways are, as we talked about what's happening with under this new COVID coronavirus tragic situation, that we have to underscore abortion care is basic and essential health care. People need it when they and their doctor decide it's right for them. Women need to be protected throughout the pregnancy. Less than 2% of abortions happen after 20 weeks. It's tragic, but it's rare. And clergy and people of faith, because you probably see this in your community as well, we know of people who face these medical decisions, and we come forward to advocate. Politicians, keep out, right? Let the doctor decide, and with the patient. So basically, we've got two emerging issues as we face the November election. We're particularly concerned about this second one, abortion later in pregnancy, here in New York State, because after the Reproductive Health Act was enacted, we had policymakers in critical districts who were being called some from out of state, from out of the country, threatened because of their votes for this bill. We're worried about, in general, about the New York State Senate. Will it go back to a majority that opposes these important initiatives and caring for all people? So we want everyone to be informed. So when we hear somebody's going on about abortion later in pregnancy, all the evils of it, listen, it's necessary and essential as a medical procedure. So, oh, Rob, yeah, good to see you. Thank you for letting us, for joining us. And we look forward to this virus lifting and seeing you at the Capitol and working arm in arm for the good of folks. So any comments about abortion later in pregnancy or anything else before we talk about a few things you can do? We can all do, actually. Okay, well, we have opportunities in Albany. You may not be able to get it in Washington, but we can get it in Albany. You can learn about us at Planned Parenthood Empire State Acts and from our website, providing comprehensive sex education, addressing healthcare disparities across the board, really, and reducing maternal mortality, protecting people from so-called crisis pregnancy centers. You can follow us on Facebook, stay informed through Upper Hudson Planned Parenthood or your Planned Parenthood affiliate. Know your state policymakers. And the most important thing you could do is call them up and say thank you. I'm thinking of Assembly Member Pat Fahey. She loves to get a call from somebody who says, I'm a religious person and I'm aware of your stand on abortion and contraception. And you can almost hear the staff member freeze up on the phone because they're so used to getting hammered. And he said, I want you to know how much I love Assembly Member Fahey. And that call will get through to her and make a difference to her. She's really a champion on our issues if you're in her district. And they just love to hear thank you because they're hearing from the other side. We have New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms, New York Family Research Foundation, the Catholic Conference. We also have ultra-Orthodox groups in the in the legislature constantly, and they're typically fighting this stuff. So if they hear from you, a phone call, an email, a fax works. And the other thing you could do is, and again, I want to point out that Reverend Trumbor is just great at this. Come to Albany once a year with us, with Interfaith Impact. If you like New York Civil Liberties Union, whatever it is, come at least once during the year, because that way you're really showing, you're showing what you stand for. You're making a difference, especially at the state level. We're in the Capitol all the time. Those phones are not ringing off the hook in those legislators' offices. And that call from you makes a difference. So keep engaged. I know you vote. I know you support organizations. But if you can find the time to show up with one of these groups, we'll all be the better for it. So so we're open up for a conversation.
I think Karen's got something for you.
Yeah. Rabbi, I'm happy you brought up the issue of maintaining the Democratic majority in the state Senate. I sort of forgot. I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
You know, and with all the concern about the offices. Can you refer us to a group or someone who is working on this particular angle? I know Working Families Party was very big and you know, before in achieving the majority, but since then I don't know.
Yeah. Well, they're basically. Yeah, I'm not here to talk about politics too much, but we're basically concerned about state senators in the Hudson Valley, all the way up, and on Long Island. Those are our biggest concerns. And you know, Planned Parenthood is out there advocating. New York Civil Liberties Union, any progressive group that's involved in electoral work or at least education. Another important thing is the census. I'm off your question, but making sure you've all been accounted and everybody you know is being counted is a critical thing because a lot hangs on that. And with the virus out there, we don't know what the impact is going to be. So it's important. So, I mean, if you support a census group, just any statewide, any New York statewide group, a progressive group has this on their radar because it deals with immigrant rights. It deals with funding for Medicaid. It deals for food assistance. There are so many things that are impacted by the composition of that Senate. I think any New York State group, find a group you like. If there's a climate group that, you know, if that's an issue that's close to you, I would get involved there. Any progressive group.
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning the census too.
I
share your interest in that. I'm actually volunteering with a local coalition working on that too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's see.
I'm going to stop the screen sharing so we can see each other. How about that?
Oh yeah, that'd be a good idea.
All right, great. Thank you.
I think Deborah had something to ask us.
Deborah.
Deborah?
Yes, let me unmute you, Deborah. Deborah, go ahead. I think where did you let me unmute you here? Zoom is very strange.
I know.
I'm going to unmute everybody because, whoops, mute all. I'm going to unmute all. There we go. Let's see if that does it. Very strange. It doesn't seem to do it. Deborah, can you put your question maybe in the chat, maybe?
think I unmuted myself.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, that's my big success of the day. So I'm sitting in my garden, but I did some community organizing during the Reagan administration when we were fighting the good old Human Life Amendment. I worked for Shirley Gordon and Family Planning Advocate.
Wow.
And back then, I'm just curious what your experience is now, but back then it was really hard to get younger people involved because once Roe v. Wade passed, it was like, we're done and I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I'm just wondering what your experience is with younger people now in terms of organizing and participating.
Yeah, I think they're a presence in Albany. I don't know if you could compare how to compare, what we saw during the Reagan administration to what we see now. But when we advocate for sex education, they come up. They're involved in the Planned Parenthood sex education programs. They understand how important it is. They tell their personal stories, and they do come up to Albany. I know Upper Hudson Planned Parenthood has been working closely with the University of Albany college campus, and they've on and off had an activist chapter there. I don't know what the status is now, but when they say we're slammed as a generation that doesn't care and doesn't want to get involved and only concerned about ourselves, I can tell you I've seen otherwise, that they are engaged, and I think maybe one of the positive that'll come out of this terrible virus situation is hopefully more folks engaged in the civic endeavor, in the process. That would be a great outcome of this terrible tragedy.
Thank you, Deborah. Any other questions? Or I think pretty comprehensive presentation, Rabbi Ross, and I really appreciate your coming to give us the update on what's happening and the importance of the upcoming election.
Thank you. Well, blessings on your work and your vision and
Thank
and
you.
what you do to make the world better.
Well, I certainly appreciate your steadfast leadership in this over the many years that I've been here, and continuing that work. And we are have much to do.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm glad we got you. You've been a great friend and partner in moving this forward and getting folks involved. It's really been uplifting.
All right. If any last comments, I'm gonna.
Well, I have a question.
Oh, good. Please.
Rabbi Ross. I'm an occasional attender at the Unitarian Church, but I'm actually up here closer to Saratoga. I have a concern about what seems to me to be a major expansion in the St. Peter's Hospital health network. I grew up in the greater Albany area. It was a hospital, but now it seems to be in charge of so many more centers and clinics all over the Capital District. And I'm concerned that their religious affiliation with the Roman Catholic Church may be restricting access to different options that people had.
Yeah.
And has that come up, or any concerns come up?
I haven't heard anything. I can look into it and maybe get back to you. I'm checking the website of Merger Watch. They haven't been updated. Lois Utley used to run that for us.
Oh, yeah.
Lois.
Gosh, I knew Lois way back
50
years ago, I think.
Yeah, right.
That did come up, actually, I think, in terms of Samaritan Hospital.
Right. One of the ones they took over.
Right.
And a few years ago. And I think there was also some concerns about end-of-life decisions as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me send a quick email to my office colleague to see if she knows Georgiana Hansen, who's phenomenal. Let's see if I can get a quick answer from her, and then I'll tell you what I know.
Okay.
Because I haven't heard much, but
Northeast Health has become increasingly corporate and moved away from being religious in its orientation, but I don't know if some of those affiliations have continued or not.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I was concerned a number of years ago. Both of my grandchildren were born at St. Peter's Hospital, and my daughters had different issues. Unlike people of my generation, she didn't see going to a Catholic hospital as a concern. In my generation, we just wouldn't go there for anything related to reproductive care or maternity because it was very clearly restrictive. Now, everything worked well. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren, but being in my 70s, I remember back when that wasn't always, all the options weren't open.
yeah. The number one thing is that people need to know what a Catholic hospital is, that they follow the bishop's ethical and religious directives, often very carefully and closely, which have significant regulations and restrictions around reproductive health care, contraception, and abortion, and the like, such that even if somebody's on Accutane, and which is, to address acne, which potentially could lead to a birth defect, which is why they dispense contraception often with Accutane. There's a problem if you're getting in a Catholic health center, even a doctor affiliated with the Catholic health center. So people need to know that they probably won't have all their options if they're going into a Catholic health center. That said, economics is driving a lot of this. And I don't need to go on about, but that too much, because I'm sure you understand and know about this. But something like 1 in 6, 1 in 5 hospital beds in the United States is through a Catholic health organization. And you see, the Catholic hierarchy is really a large not-for-profit business. They own cemeteries. They run cemeteries. They run hospitals. They run nursing homes. They're really a large conglomerate. When I've said this publicly in front of some Catholic priests, and they get furious because they say, no, we're doing God's mission and we're serving. But you got to realize when you walk into one of these things, it's in some ways, if you need a certain thing, it's like walking into a church, and you may not be able to get it, despite the fact that they take money from the government. I remember, I think it was in Massachusetts, goes back a while, but the Catholic Adoption Agency was being told by the state to place children in gay homes because there was a great need and they refused to, and they accused the state of driving them out of business. I said, no, the state didn't drive you. You decided to go out of business. Why are you blaming us? So it's a real issue. I think education is critical. I'll let you know if I'll send Sam, I'll drop Sam an email if I hear, when I hear. I asked Georgiana, she always gets back to me, so I'll find out if there's more, but I don't know much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, because there's been there's been some, maybe I shouldn't say a lot of controversy over ectopic pregnancies and what's the care, and different hospitals in the whole network around the country have taken slightly different views of that, whether that is closer to an abortion or closer to a medical necessity. And so that is one of the big areas of concern where you have those types of issues.
Right. The interesting thing is there have been times where they've had the hospital mergers or the acquisitions, but the religious restrictions didn't convey.
And they have the whole debacle with St. Clair's Hospital joining Ellis. Right. And we were told that it was part of the diocese, and the diocese says, no, it's not. So, it seems that black and white there's an awful lot of gray, and that's where we get into the weeds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it all these things, these religious restrictions, it reminds me in Judaism, the milk can't touch the meat. Well, that's fine on your plate, but what I put on mine is,
That's why you have different plates, right?
Yeah, right. You want 2 sets of plates in your house, it's fine. Don't impose it on me.
Oh.
The other place that it shows up, a little off topic, but it also shows up around end-of-life issues. I'm always amazed with hospice and the Catholic hospice center at St. Peter's, that when you're close to death, there's plenty of morphine available as much as you want. And, in a way, that's hastening death pretty radically. But, they waffle on this stuff. So,
Yeah.
and I bet that's true with that topic. Pregnancies, too. They're probably okay with terminating those because they'll kill the mother. I think we're at our hour here, so I want to give Dennis his appreciation again, and I'm going to stop the recording.